House and car included, mother-in-law excluded. This phrase, popular in the 1960s, symbolized the ideal marriage partner and dream marital life for women. Of course, there are many respectable mothers-in-law out there. But mine was exactly the kind of mother-in-law I would most like to exclude from this world, a real nightmare. And my sister-in-law was no better. Susan, the sanitary pads are running low again. I am Susan, 29 years old, and the one who yelled was the mother of George, my 44-year-old husband, whom I married despite our age difference. Every week, my mother-in-law, Mary, would show up at our new home, check the sanitary pads in the bathroom, and yell at me if they were running low. Come on. I didn't want George to marry with such an age gap, but I tolerated it, thinking you would give me grandchildren. Why aren't you having any? But we had only been married for a year. George was my former boss at work. George, 15 years my senior, had been busy with work and missed his chance to marry, but he finally tied the knot after my persistent pursuit. Considering my husband's age and the time until his retirement, it would be better to have children soon, but thankfully, George, being a saver, had steadily accumulated savings, so he said there was no need to rush into having children. Plus, I had recently switched to a stable job with a lower salary, but with the possibility of returning after childbirth. So, I wanted to enjoy our newlywed life a bit longer. However, such thoughts didn't make sense to Mary in her early 70s. She strongly believed that a wife's role was to bear children, and, right after we returned from our honeymoon, she gleefully said, "I can't wait for the honeymoon baby." Unfortunately, I fell ill during our honeymoon, so that had to wait, but when I told this to my mother-in-law, she flew into a rage. "You paid so much for an overseas trip, and you get sick at such a time." Well, that's easier said than done. Originally, it was my husband who caught a cold, and then it was passed on to me. But if I said that, she would retort with something nonsensical like, "Young people these days just can't take advice from their elders." And then she even said, "Managing your husband's health is your job. Why did you let George catch a cold? You really are an incompetent wife." I was so fed up with always having to deal with this. You're right, I'm not a perfect wife, so I reported all of Mary's harassment to George. Initially, George, who only knew Mary's kind side, had trouble believing me. But once I recorded a conversation with her on my phone and let him hear it, he completely took my side. However, even after George complained to her, her harassment only became more insidious. For instance, when invited for dinner at her house, she would serve raw fish, which I dislike. When I couldn't bring myself to eat it, she would say sweetly, "You know, raw fish is rich in DHA and EPA, which are good for the brain. You should eat plenty now, or you won't have a smart child," and then whisper maliciously to me, "You'll have a stupid child like yourself." Then, the food she served me would be extremely salty. Young people's taste buds are getting dull these days, so I added extra salt to yours. Tasty, right? When I desperately drank water because of the saltiness, she would snatch it away, saying, "No, no. Drinking too much water dilutes stomach acids and hinders digestion." Meanwhile, my husband, all smiles, says, "Thanks Mom, it's nice of you to be so considerate of Susan." I do love how kind and caring he is, but he seems to lack a bit in the ability to doubt others. Especially when it comes to Mary, he probably doesn't even entertain the idea of doubting her. Then there was this incident. About 2 years into our marriage, George's salary started to decrease. Due to the recession, his bonuses were cut every time. When George casually mentioned this to Mary, she consoled him, saying, "It can't be helped, every industry is tough now, George. You're doing your best," but then she glared at me, saying, "That's why I told you to have children early. Raising kids costs money. What are you planning to do? You really are an unplanned wife." At that point, I couldn't help but retort, "No, I'm fine. I have my own savings," while giving her a sidelong glare in response. Afterwards, Mary and I had many confrontations that almost escalated, but I always restrained myself and refrained from telling my husband. I didn't want to put him in a difficult position by fighting in front of him. George often asked if I was getting along with Mary, but I avoided involving him and instead thought of my own ways to retaliate. The opportunity for that battle came sooner than expected. As usual, Mary barged into our house and, remembering that I mentioned having savings, started off with, "You said you've saved up quite a bit. and then demanded, "What's yours is your husband's, and what's your husband's is also his parents'. Tell me how much you have saved." "Why should I? I just told you." "And what would you do with that information?" She was momentarily taken aback by my response, then said, "You can't possibly manage money properly, can you? That's quite rude, you know?" "I am 30 years old," I replied. "To me, you're just an inexperienced fool in life. That's why I'm saying I'll manage it for you." "I'm fine, thank you. My savings are mine, not yours or my husband's. I don't need someone else to manage them for me." When I firmly countered, she yelled back, "Who do you think you are, talking back to me that? If you keep this up, I'll make sure you get divorced." "Divorce? Can she really think she has the power to do that? And who do you think you are? Are you really okay with saying such things to me?" I replied and left her house. The next day, she called me with a tone of triumph. "Susan, you remember what I said yesterday, right? About divorce? I've granted your divorce. I've filed for divorce mediation for you." Not that I hadn't anticipated something like this and hadn't already looked into it. As she proudly informed me, I replied, "You can't just dissolve someone else's marriage. If you forged our signatures and submitted the paper, that's a crime called falsifying an official document." Hearing this, her voice began to tremble. "A crime?" "Yes, technically, it's punishable by up to 5 years in prison," I said, deciding to scare her a bit. Though in reality, such offenses often result in a fine, I didn't tell her that. "Oh no. I already sent it." Turns out, she had indeed forged our signatures and submitted the paper for divorce mediation. "Understood. I'll report this to the police then," I said. Wait. Please, don't call the police. It was just a joke, a little joke." "Do something, please," she pleaded. "It's not an exaggeration, it's a legal offense with established penalties," I told her. Upon hearing this, Mary finally broke down crying. "Are you okay with having a criminal in the family? It was just a little joke. Please do something." She must have been really scared. Reluctantly, I asked her how she mailed the document. She used a service that leaves a delivery record, not regular mail. Since she posted it after 7 p.m. last night. I told her to immediately call the post office with the tracking number as there might be a chance to stop it. Following my advice, she immediately called the post office. Later, I heard that it was fortunately retrieved. At the same time, I rushed to the local court and filed a non-acceptance of divorce mediation form. This would invalidate any papers she had forged. "Listen, Mary, if you ever do something like this again, I will tell George everything." I warned her, ensuring she promised never to do it again. I could have reported her to the police, but I hesitated to bring legal trouble upon my beloved George's mother. This threat seemed to work, as she behaved herself for a while. However, an enemy also scratches when cornered. She enlisted Lily, George's sister who had returned home after a divorce, into her scheme. Lily, for years younger than George, had been kicked out of her marital home due to repeated infidelities. Yet, this irresponsible woman dared to lecture me. "Susan, when do you plan on having kids? I don't know how you can stand being George's wife without them," she said. I really didn't want to hear that from someone who had 3 children with her affair partners. Mary and Lily teamed up to call me a worthless wife and a barren woman. So I said, "Well, George is already 44 years old. I read a study saying that men's fertility declines after 35. Even if I divorced George and he remarried, the chances of having children would be low, wouldn't they?" Shocked, both of them just stared at me as I continued. "And do you really think George would find a new wife? A house where a 70-year-old mother-in-law and a 40-something sister-in-law harass the wife? I doubt any woman would willingly marry into that situation. We're not harassing you. You're not aware of it? Maybe I should consider divorcing George as a test," I joked, and their faces turned ashen. "If you do that, we'll demand alimony and a share of the assets." "You said you had a lot of savings, right, Susan?" "Yes, about $50,000. "Then I'll take half of that." "I won't give it to you," I responded. "Property division means splitting everything in half." You don't even know that, Lily sneered, and I laughed back at her. I'm aware of that. But property division only applies to assets acquired during the marriage. What? That $50,000 I saved it all before I got married, so it's not subject to division. And why do you think you're entitled to any of it anyway? They were speechless at this point. Oh, and by the way, caring for you, Mary? That has nothing to do with me. Best of luck. What? Taking care of parents is the wife's job. Not at all. The law dictates that blood relatives are responsible for care. So, I don't have to do it. That's ridiculous. I have 3 children, Lily said. Whether you have children or not, you can't escape your responsibilities as a blood relative. I smiled at the two of them, shocked and wide-eyed. Later, I told George everything. He became furious and unilaterally decided to put Mary in a nursing home. With George's savings from over the years and Mary's pension, it seemed they could afford the initial fee and monthly costs for the home. However, the home is over 3 hours away by car, so we hardly visit. Given her nasty nature, she seems to be isolated even in the nursing home. The family house is in poor condition, and now Lily and her 3 children live there, but it's deteriorating further with each hurricane. With over 10 spots now leaking. We've decided to renounce any inheritance, so the rundown house will go to Lily. It's over 50 years old, poorly lit, far from the station, and in a terrible location. Plus, with few necessary facilities nearby, even if she sells it, she won't keep more than $50,000 after demolition costs. Since Lily's divorce was due to her infidelity, she received no alimony. The father of her children is refusing to pay child support, possibly because they're not his. Since she squandered her assets, she got almost nothing in the property division, so her future looks bleak. Tough luck.